Don't move, Danny.
So that's what I heard. A shot, not a backfire.
Yes, and I need your help.
Some other time. I don't want the money that bad.
Hello to all the classic people that are returning. I'm glad you're back. I want to welcome any new visitors. Continuing our Noir-vember celebration, today on Classic Movie Review, we are taking on FIlm Noir, Too Late for Tears, 1949. This film is also known by the name Killer Bait, 1955, for a later release. This film has a pretty solid 7.3 on IMDb.com. On RottenTomatoes.com, the film has 100% on the tomato meter, based on only 5 reviews, and a 64% audience score. The 64% seems like a fair rating for this film. New York Times film critic A.H. Wheeler said on August 15, 1949, quote, "Despite an involved plot and an occasional overabundance of palaver, not all of which is bright, this yarn about a cash-hungry dame who doesn't let men or conscience stand in her way is an adult and generally suspenseful adventure," unquote. Elizabeth Scott is really good as the Femme Fatale, as usual, although the dialogue they gave her could use a good rewrite. Arthur Kennedy is solid and dependable. Dan Duryea is great as the stinker who gets in over his head. The combination of Duryea and Scott make this film a must-watch. Actors.
Right, and I'm a Shakespearean actor.
Elizabeth Scott played greedy and homicidal femme fatale Jane Palmer. Scott was first covered in the great film noir The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, 1946. Eminent film noir star Dan Duryea played a small-time tough guy who was in over his head from the very start, Danny Fuller. Duryea was first covered in the excellent World War II era film Sahara, 1943. Denver Pyle, Grandpa Jesse, had a small, uncredited role as a youth in Union Station. Pyle was first mentioned in The Alamo, 1960. Christine Miller played the role of Kathy Palmer, sister to Alan and sister-in-law to Jane. Miller was born in Argentina in 1925. Her father was an oil executive and her mother was a singer from California. The family moved to California and then to Denmark before World War II caused them to relocate to San Francisco. Following her mother's influence, Miller began acting in high school. One way or another, she ended up at Paramount. Miller started out with uncredited roles in Club Havana 1945, Suspense 1946, and The Trouble with Women 1947, before getting credited in Desert Fury 1947 and I Walk Alone 1947. She continued to work in films including Jungle Patrol 1948, Sorry Wrong Number 1948, Too Late for Tears 1949, High Lonesome 1950, Shadow on the Wall 1950, The Steel Fist 1952, Tropical Heat Wave 1952, Flight Nurse 1953, Just a Small Bit and From Here to Eternity 1953, Geraldine 1953, Hell's Outpost 1954, The Persuader 1957, and her final film, The Heart is a Rebel 1958. Miller worked in television roles and with her husband founded many local television channels. She died in 2015. The consistently solid Arthur Kennedy played doomed husband Alan Palmer. Kennedy was born in Massachusetts in 1914. He was a drama student at Carnegie Institute of Technology before joining local and touring theater companies. He made his Broadway debut in 1937. Kennedy moved to Los Angeles in 1938 and had his first film role in 1940. Kennedy had a few more roles before being called to service in World War II. These roles included the film noir High Sierra 1941, They Died with Their Boots On 1941, and Air Force 1943. Kennedy served in the U.S. Army Air Force, working in films and production. Following his war service, Kennedy hit the ground running with 3 film noirs, Boomerang 1947, Chicago Deadline 1949, and Too Late for Tears 1949. He was nominated for a Best Supporting Actor Oscar for Champion 1949. This was followed by The Glass Menagerie 1950, and he was nominated for a Best Actor Oscar for Bright Victory 1951. He continued with Rancho Notorious 1952 and The Lusty Men 1952. This latter film was an incredible rodeo film with Robert Mitchum and Susan Hayward. It provided me with one of my guiding philosophies of life. Kennedy acted in some more film noirs: Impulse 1954, Crash Out 1955, and The Desperate Hours 1955. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for Trial 1955, and for Peyton Place 1957, and for Some Came Running 1958. Kennedy continued to act in some of the greatest films of the 1960s, including Elmer Gantry 1960, Barabbas 1961. Well, really not one of the greatest. Lawrence of Arabia 1962, Cheyenne Autumn 1964, and Fantastic Voyage 1966. Kennedy worked extensively on television and on the Broadway stage. He continued to make low-quality films through the late 1980s. Kennedy died in 1990. Don DeFore played the mysterious Don Blake. DeFore was born in Iowa in 1913. After high school, DeFore began studying at the University of Iowa. He later joined a local theater group. He attended the Pasadena Playhouse for 3 years. This eventually led to him debuting on Broadway in 1938. DeFore made his film debut in 1941. He was medically ineligible to serve in World War II, and as a result was in many of the era's war films such as 30 Seconds Over Tokyo 1944 and You Came Along 1945. Other movies he is known for include The Male Animal 1942, It Happened on Fifth Avenue 1947, Romance on the High Seas 1948, My Friend Irma 1949, which was the first film for Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin, and Too Late for Tears 1949. DeFore is known primarily as a television actor for the beloved series he was part of, including The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet 1952 to 1957, and Hazel 1961 to 1965. Following these series, DeFore worked extensively on television until 1987. He died in 1993. Story.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
The movie begins on a dark California road. A car pulls to the side of the road at mile marker 3.5. The man, Robert Neff, checks the time and finds it's 8:30. A car driven by Alan Palmer, Arthur Kennedy, is coming in the direction of the parked car. Also in the car is Alan's wife, Jane Palmer, Elizabeth Scott, and she is in a mood. They are driving to a party at Alan's boss's home. Jane wants nothing to do with the boss's wife. She asks Alan to turn around, but he refuses. In a fit, Jane reaches across and tries to turn the ignition off, which is something you could do until the invention of locking steering wheels. During the struggle, she turns off the headlights by accident. Alan swerves but gets the car back under control and turns the lights back on. The man in the waiting car pulls onto the highway and tosses a black bag into the back of Alan and Jane's car. The couple stop their car and open the bag. It is stuffed with money. They see another car coming down the road, flashing its lights off and on. Jane recognizes that this is the pickup symbol for the money. She demands Alan jump in the car as she drives away. The second car chases the couple. Jane drives like she's been a wheelman for the mob all her life. She loses the following car in an intersection. Alan takes over the driving as they get back into the city. Jane is hyped about the money, but Alan realizes it's trouble. A motorcycle cop turns on his siren. Jane urges Alan to flee, but he stops for the cop. When the cop approaches the car, Jane opens the glove compartment and puts her hand on a large flashlight. Jane tells the cop that they are eloping. The cop gives him a ticket for not signaling. When the cop leaves, Alan asks Jane what she planned to do with the flashlight. She says she doesn't know. Jane asks Alan why he didn't give up the money when he had the chance. He says he doesn't know. Alan says he wants to look at the money in their apartment. In the garage, they run into the garage attendant, Pete, Smokey Whitfield. Pete sees the bag of money and thinks it's an overnight bag. Alan asks if his sister, Kathy Palmer, Christine Miller, has come home yet. Pete says Kathy has not come home yet. Jane locks the door to their apartment and turns out most of the lights before dumping the money on the bed. Jane is flying high and Alan is still scared. He thinks there is $100,000 in the bag. Alan says keeping the money is a felony, but I'm not so sure about that. Jane wants to hide the money and wait until it's safe. Someone knocks on the door and Alan hides the money. It's Alan's sister, Kathy. She lets herself inside. Kathy lives across the hall in apartment 515. Kathy knows something is wrong with the couple, so she decides to leave. Jane and Alan go back to talking about the money. Alan thinks the man that chased them may have their license number. Jane says she just wants to hide the money and not touch it. Alan agrees to keep the money for a week. Jane and Alan go to Union Station and check the bag of money at the parcel check. Alan drops the claim ticket into the pocket of his overcoat. Jane asks for the ticket, and Alan finds that it has fallen into the coat lining through a hole in the pocket. Jane asks Alan what he said to the counterman. He at first denies saying anything, before stating that he said he was going to the hospital and it would be a while before he came back. Sometime later, Jane is shown going into her apartment with boxes of clothes she has purchased. She hides today's boxes with others she has under the cabinet. There's a knock on the door, and Jane opens it to find Dan Duryea, standing there. He introduces himself as a Fuller detective agent. Danny says he is doing a routine check based on a license number. He lets himself inside and asks to check the apartment. Danny bluffs that he could get a warrant to search. He refuses to tell Jane why he is searching. Danny finds the clothing boxes, and one of them is a mink. Danny changes tone and raises his voice that she is already spending the money and he wants his money. He says if she was innocent, she would not have let him search the apartment. Jane realizes that Danny is not a detective.
If you were an innocent housewife with nothing to hide but the Iceman, you'd never let me in here. You'd have been screaming for that warrant and sending wires to your congressman, so let's cut the small talk. Where's my dough?
Then you're not a policeman.
Only on my mother's side, honey. Where's the dough?
She says the packages belong to her sister-in-law, and she let him in because housewives get awfully bored. Danny starts slapping her. Jane says they gave the money to the cops. Danny says if the money was turned in, it will be in the paper. He says if it's not, he'll be back and he will be peeved. Alan comes home early and finds Jane repacking the mink. The bank is called to let him know that his wife is on a spending spree. Ah, the good old days. Alan says he is going to send the money to the district attorney. Jane refuses. Alan throws her first husband up to her about not being happy. She says she has always felt this way about money because she was brought up poor. Jane convinces Alan to wait the week as they originally planned. Alan proposes that the next night they go on a date and take a boat ride. The scheme forms in Jane's eyes. It may be implied that she knocked off her first husband. The following day, Danny uses some pass keys to let himself into the apartment. Jane is undaunted. In fact, she is lying in wait like a tiger ready to pounce. Danny thinks he's in control, but Jane already has the upper hand. Jane offers Danny a drink. She tells that her husband plans on turning the money over to the cops. Jane says she is not going to let that happen. After a kiss, Danny decides to go 50-50 with Jane. Danny leaves a number where he can be contacted. He gives her a chin twist before he leaves to show his toughness. That day, Jane makes a visit to the lake where her date is scheduled for that night. She calls Danny and tells him to be waiting on the west end of the lake by a large palm tree at 9 p.m. Jane is concerned about getting a fair deal from Danny, but he assures her he will. She returns home and takes her husband's automatic pistol out of a drawer. Jane loads the gun into her purse and heads out for her date with Alan. Jane makes Alan take out a 4-person boat. Alan tips the boat attendant. The couple cruise to the middle of the lake. Jane is deep in her own thoughts. Alan is oblivious. Jane has second thoughts and wants to go back to shore. She says she wants to put the claim check in the mail. Alan reaches for her purse to get a cigarette, and the gun falls out. Jane and Alan begin to struggle over the gun. It fires, killing Alan. First off, how big is this lake that tons of other people wouldn't hear a gunshot? One guy thought he heard it.
Did you hear something then?
Stop hearing things and kiss me.
And Danny thought it was a backfire. Secondly, why not jump in the water and swim away? If they shoot you while you're swimming, they will have some splaining to do. Jane takes the boat with Alan's body and signals Danny, who's waiting by the palm tree. Danny gets into the boat and sees the dead body. Jane pulls the gun on him. Danny doesn't want to go along with the killing. She forces him to help.
Don't move, Danny.
So that's what I heard. A shot, not a backfire.
Yes, and I need your help.
Some other time. I don't want the money that bad. Do you take me back to shore or do I swim?
If you move, I'll shoot you. And tell them you killed my husband.
Saying she will shoot him and say that he killed her husband. Jane has an anchor ready to weigh down the body when they drop it in the lake. When they get back to the dock, Danny keeps his head down and pretends to be Alan. Jane tips the attendant again so they will be remembered. Danny wants the money now, but Jane says she will meet him near midnight. Jane and Danny drive into the apartment garage. Jane asks Pete for a car wash, and Danny pulls away in the car before he can be discovered. Jane yells for cigarettes as if Alan was going to the store. Jane knocks on Kathy's door and says Alan has gone to get a bottle. She invites Kathy over for a drink. Jane starts calling around looking for Alan to establish her alibi. Kathy goes to make drinks. Jane calls the police, but they can't help with a missing person after 5 p.m. Kathy busts Jane for having a bunch of liquor in the house. Jane tells her sister-in-law that Alan no longer loves her. Kathy doesn't believe it and leaves to go home. Jane goes to her scheduled meeting with Danny. She doesn't see Danny around the corner as she gets into the car. Jane adjusts the gun to a place where she can easily access it. Danny gets in the car. Jane says she left the gun at home. Danny checks her purse and is sure Jane doesn't have a gun. He keeps calling her Tiger, not knowing she is the lioness hunting him. Jane drives wildly out towards Laurel Canyon, as that is where she told him the money was hidden. Jane questions Danny about the source of the money, but he won't tell her. She adjusts the gun under her leg. Jane is almost hit by another car, and Danny uses it as a chance to escape because he realizes he is on a one-way trip. He yells that he will deal with her when there are 1 million people around.
Not this time, Tiger. You didn't bury that dough and I know it. I'll see you sometime when there's daylight and 1 million people around.
Jane is freaking out because Danny has Alan's overcoat and she thinks the ticket is still in the pocket. Jane abandons the car at the beach. She throws something in the water that is presumed to be the gun, but she has the gun later in the film. Sometime after she leaves, 2 men find and steal the car. Jane makes it back home and Kathy calls, thinking Alan has arrived in the elevator. Later, Jane goes to the apartment where Danny is staying. He takes his gun out of the drawer before letting her inside. He takes Alan's gun from her purse. Jane starts asking about the coat. Danny knows there is something about the coat. He gives her the hat and the coat. Danny pulls out a fake claim ticket from the coat. Jane faints. Apparently, Alan had made the fake, fearing Jane would steal the money. Being suspicious of Jane's story, Kathy uses her key to enter and search Jane and Alan's apartment. She eventually makes it to the dresser and discovers that the gun is missing. Underneath the oily gun rag, she finds the claim ticket. The phone rings, but Kathy decides to exit the apartment. Don Blake, Don DeFore, is outside the door, an old war buddy of Alan's. He has never met Jane, but decided to drop by because he was in town. Kathy yanks Don into her apartment as the elevator arrives. Don figures out that she is avoiding Jane. Kathy tells that Alan is missing. Don wants to help his old buddy. Don says that he believes there is something hinky with the death of Jane's first husband. Jane wakes up on Danny's bed. Danny has figured that the money is in a claim check somewhere. Jane wants her gun back. Danny is a little indignant that Jane was going to kill him last night. He says he needs to know her better and tries to kiss her. She backs away, but he threatens her with violence and calling the cops. She decides to go along. Jane goes back to her apartment and is scouring the joint for the ticket. Kathy comes over to ask if there is news of Alan. Kathy asks to look for Alan's gun, a favorite war treasure, knowing it was missing when she looked. Jane opens the drawer, but she has replaced the gun. Lieutenant Breach, Perry Kelly from Homicide, knocks on the door and Jane lets him inside. He explains that missing persons are assigned to the Homicide Division. Breach asks if there is anything she would like to add to her report. Breach says they know about the other woman. Jane is shocked. The car that Jane and Danny almost hit reported Danny and Jane as Alan and another woman using their physical description and the license number. Jane lands on her feet and makes up a story, including a description of the woman. Kathy can't believe Jane has never told her about the other woman. Breach gets a call that the car was located near the Mexican border.
If you really want some action on your husband, Mrs. Palmer, I'd suggest you bring in some private help. Your car was located 12 miles south of San Diego, just this side of the Mexican border. Your husband wasn't in some kind of trouble, was he, Mrs. Palmer?
No, or not that I know of.
The police will no longer be looking for Alan. Kathy accuses Jane of lying about the other woman.
I know Alan wasn't seeing another woman, and so do you.
Where Alan's concerned, my dear, you're blind. It's time you knew it.
Your description of this other woman, Jane, it sounded very much like you.
What do you mean by that? What are you trying to imply?
I'm not quite sure.
Kathy storms into the hall and runs into Don. Kathy introduces Don to Jane, and she invites him inside. Jane asks Don questions about his time in England during the war. Finally, Don asks why she is interrogating him. Jane says Don is intriguing her. Don responds that they should wait to see if Alan comes back. She gets mad and throws him out. Don asks if he should get rid of the guy that is watching Jane's apartment, which of course is Danny. When Don leaves, Jane calls an old war buddy of Alan's, Jack Sharper, David Clark, to check if he knows Don. Jack says he doesn't recognize the name. Jane invites Jack over to meet Don the next night. Danny lets himself into the apartment and warns Jane not to try and steal all the money. Jane tells about Kathy noticing the booze and the missing gun. Danny wants to run, but Jane wants to kill Kathy with Danny's help. Jane tells Danny to get poison to give Kathy.
You've got no other choice. We can't just wait and let her kill us. I didn't mean to kill Alan, but it's done. And now it's our lives against hers.
We kill her, huh? Do you really think you can get away with that?
Yes. Kathy was all wrapped up in Alan. She missed work today. She's what the papers will call despondent.
She thinks the police will think Kathy was despondent about her brother. Danny agrees to go along because he is caught, but he is not happy. Don is watching the hall and sees Danny leave. He follows the criminal and records the license plate. Later, Don goes to see Kathy and asks where Jane and Alan went on their date. He has her bring a picture of Jane and Alan. Don shows the picture to the boat attendant. When Don tips the attendant, he remembers that Jane paid. This was not typical during this era. Don and Kathy are taking a shine to each other. Don maintains that he really is a friend of Alan's. They kiss a little, and Don says he doesn't trust Jane. Danny shows up at Jane's apartment, drunker than Cooter Brown. He gives the poison to Jane, and she tells him to leave. Danny tells that the poison seller said he didn't look like a killer. Kathy is about to drink a glass of milk, and the music says the milk is poisoned. Don knocks on the door, and she doesn't finish the milk. He invites her out on a date. Don puts the milk back in the refrigerator. Kathy puts the claim ticket in her purse. She shows Don the ticket and says she wants to go to Union Station after dinner. Don takes the ticket and says they will go before. Jane comes to Kathy's door and wants Don to come over and meet Schraber. Don and Kathy follow Jane into the apartment. Schraber says Don was not stationed with him and Alan in England. Kathy asks Don for the ticket back and asks him to leave. Jane tells Schraber he can leave. Jane whips the gun out from under her couch cushion. While Jane is taking the ticket out of Don's pocket, Kathy escapes. She calls the police from her apartment before returning to Jane's apartment. Don is knocked out on the floor and Jane is gone. Kathy calls a doctor for Don. She also calls the police and warns them that Jane will try to pick up the package. Jane is cagey and thinks the police may be watching the claims area. She sees a guy, Denver Pyle, and offers him $5 to claim the bag for her. To spice it up a bit, she tells the guy that he can spend the fin on her if he wants. When the guy claims the bag, it has a note that says to call the police. The guy gives Jane the bag, takes his 5 spot, and leaves. Jane reads the note, which says if the bag is claimed by a woman, the police should be called. Good old Alan. The police are with Don and Kathy in Jane's apartment. Kathy says that the police wouldn't go to Union Station. Don tells Kathy that he really doesn't know Alan. Don gets Danny's address from the police using the license number he wrote down earlier. Danny is sleeping it off when Jane shows up with the money. He doesn't really want to deal with her, and he checks her for the gun. He doesn't understand why she wants to share with him. She says she needs a man to travel with so she won't draw attention to herself. Jane is obsessing about where the money came from. She wants to know if it is clean and if they can spend it. Danny tells that it was blackmail money and it was to be thrown in his car so the man he was blackmailing would not see his face. He finally says that it is an insurance man who was skimming premiums.
Somebody threw that money into our car. Why?
Because you don't go into a guy's office in a blackmail payoff, sweet. Besides, he didn't know what I looked like, and I wanted to keep it that way.
But who is it and why did
Never mind who it is, Tiger. Big insurance agent. Sells policies on bridges and aqueducts and stuff. Who ever heard of anything happening to a bridge? So the policies never went back to New York. They're just pieces of paper my benefactor's been collecting premiums on for years.
Jane makes drinks for the two of them. As soon as he takes his drink, Danny realizes he's been poisoned. He falls dead. Jane is only slightly shocked and quickly turns back to the money. With the information given by Don, the police go to Danny's place and find his body and the poison. Don tells the police it was murder and the police should drag the lake. The police grab a woman outside who knew Danny. She tells that Danny was working on a big deal of $50 or $60K. The lady says she was with Danny when he bought the poison. Don finds out it will cost $4,000 to drag the lake if the police don't do the job. Jane drives south towards Mexico into the desert. She stops and transfers the money out of the bag and into the trunk well of the car. She tosses the bag into the desert. A man stops and asks to help. He finds a $100 bill on the bumper and becomes very curious. As the man asks if he can protect her, a highway patrolman arrives. Jane says she is fine and drives away. She crosses the border into Mexico with no problem, eventually making it to Mexico City. That would be a hell of a drive from Los Angeles to Mexico City. Jane checks in under her maiden name of Petrie. Later, she is out on the town with her Mexican escort, Carlos. She sends Carlos away and goes to her room alone. When someone knocks on the door, she thinks it's Carlos, but she opens it to find Don. Don pushes into the room, and Jane maintains that she is not hiding and only used her maiden name because she is divorcing Alan. Don asks for half the money. Don says he found Alan's body in the lake. She comes back with the police know where she is. But Don says the police don't know about the body because he put the body back. Jane picks up her purse and Don thinks she may be going for a gun. Don says he will only be taking half of the money. When she brings out the money, Don only takes $4,000, the cost of having the lake dragged. Don says he is not a cop and Jane offers him all of the money. Don calls down and has the police come up. At last, Don says he is the brother of Jane's first husband and he is going to see that she pays for 1 or 2 killings.
Why, Mr. Blake? Tell me why.
Not Blake, Blanchard. Does it mean anything to you?
I once married a man named Blanchard.
Yes, my brother. I was overseas when it happened, but I never really believed Bob killed himself. You killed him.
I swear I didn't kill him. He found out I didn't love him and he killed himself. I swear it. I swear I didn't kill him.
There are many ways of killing a man, Jane. Now that I know you, I can believe Bob probably did kill himself. But then there's Alan Palmer. Your friend Danny. You're all through killing now, Jane.
The Mexican police bust into the room. Jane pulls a gun and says the money is hers and Don is lying. She runs onto the balcony and trips over a suitcase. This causes her to fall over the rail to her death. She hits the ground and loose bills are scattered around her. Kathy is waiting for Don in the lobby. They are already married and head home. Jane's bloody hand and the money are shown. Conclusion. Femme fatale is defined in the Oxford English Dictionary as an attractive and seductive woman, especially one who will ultimately bring disaster to a man who becomes involved with her. Great film critic Roger Ebert said it more succinctly, saying a, quote, woman who would just as soon kill you as love you, and vice versa, unquote. Elizabeth Scott gives a master class in how to be a femme fatale in today's film. Arthur Kennedy, as Alan, may have had a clue about his wife, in that he mentioned her unhappiness with her first husband, and he left a note on the money bag. Was he involved in the killing of the first husband? It seems like Dan Duryea as Danny is doomed from the moment he meets Scott as Jane. Danny thinks he's dealing with a simple housewife that he can control with smarts and just enough brutality. Having prior experience in getting rid of at least one person already, Jane is 3 steps ahead of Danny at all times, even having him buy the poison that she uses to knock him off. I will be moving Elizabeth Scott up the rankings in my great Femme Fatales of Film Noir list. Send me a note or add a comment on how you feel about the rankings. This film was relatively recently restored by the UCLA Film Archive with funding from the FilmNoirFoundation.org. This is a good cause, and you can help with a donation to the foundation. You will also receive their great Film Noir magazine if you donate. World famous short summary: brother dies and sister gets a new hubby. This show is now completely free and independent, brought to you without ads. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe and leave a review where you get your podcast. It really helps the show get found. As a technical note, references and citations are listed for each show on the site at classicmovierev.com. Beware the Moors.